The song I See a Darkness, I remembered the Mekons because the Mekons have a song called When Darkness Falls. They have a song called Prince of Darkness. They have a song called Only Darkness Has the Power, Darkness and Doubt. And so it was this wonderful revelation that I See a Darkness is actually just a Mekons tribute song.
Well, you're my friend, it's what you told me. And can you see what's inside of me? Many times we've been out drinking, and many times we've shared our thoughts.
I had found not long ago the Post-it notes onto which I had written the lyrics as the song was coming together. And I think we scanned them and put them on the inner sleeve maybe of the record that came out a few years ago called Songs of Love and Horror, that came out at the same time as the lyric book. I'm not sure that I've put together many sets of lyrics on Post-it notes, especially I think those were Post-it notes with a commercial entity identified on the Post-it notes who provided the free pad of Post-it notes, and it was some sort of, I don't remember, plumbing supply or something like that. And they were small Post-it notes, so I had to use multiple notes in order to get the whole lyric on there. It's a song about friendship. There's a lot of Bonnie Prince Billy songs about friendship, either explicitly or tangentially. But addressing somebody with whom I knew I had a creative connection and a personal connection. It, of course, is a song of optimism, guarded optimism and concerned optimism, like that the optimism will not necessarily bear the fruit that we ideally would like it to bear because there are maybe one too many forces against certain kinds of optimism out in the world.
Well, you know I have a love for everyone I know. And you know I have a drive to live, I won't let go. But could you see its opposition?
The verses, they don't share chord progressions. They have different chord progressions, the two verses. So it's kind of like an A part, then a chorus, then a B part, and then a chorus. And the choruses were meant to be kind of triumphant. There was a big guitar part that I had tried to impose upon Bob Ariano, and he played it, and it was stupid. So it's not on there, thank goodness. That was the only thing I think I ever tried to get him to play on the record, and it was a bad idea. But at the time, I wanted the record. Two guides for the environment of the record that I was thinking about were Lee Scratch Perry's productions of Bob Marley and the Wailers, specifically the record Soul Rebels, which I'd heard at Bob Ariano's house in Rhode Island and just impressed me to no end as a kind of a record that I think of as these. I've long been intrigued by, if not obsessed by, post-apocalyptic landscapes as represented in books and movies. Doesn't seem to be represented that often in music, except in these imaginary spaces. So I listening to Soul Rebels by ostensibly Bob Marley and the Wailers, but at least as much by Lee Scratch Perry, to me sounds like a record that could be made in a decimated landscape, potentially even in a bunker. You know, it's the rebirth of humanity or the continuance of humanity based on a very small group of people who are thinking like, well, if we want to hold on to some of the best parts of music up to this point of this, massive cataclysmic event in human history and then carry it forward, what would we get rid of and what would we move forward? And that's when I listened to that record or to Roger Miller's Tender Look at Love and There's a few other records along these lines, maybe Kevin Coyne and Dagmar Krause's Babel, where it feels like that would be the gold record that I would send into space to try to fool people in outer space into thinking that we were that awesome. So it was Bob Marley and the Wailers, Lee Scratch Perry, Soul Rebels, as well as Bruce Springsteen's Darkness on the Edge of Town. Because that record also has there's no other record that really creates a similar space that is upliftingly bleak.
That I see a darkness, and that I see a darkness, and that I see a darkness, and that I see a darkness. And did you know how much I love you? There's a hope that somehow you can save me from this darkness.
I mean, how strange and unique the record sounds, and it's really awesome listening to it after listening to like Green Leaves and Mount Eerie also, even those records came a few years after. But just hearing just the oddity of the sound of the record and the world of the record sounds homespun, and yet there's a confidence in those builds, and it's a realization of certain artistic dreams to pull off those builds, and not feel like humility needs to rule the day, but that checked bombast has a really, really marvelous and crucial place in our musical world. And that's another song that is so beautifully and so remarkably sonically defined in this recording by Colin's piano playing. Not to say Pete Townshend's drumming on the whole record, because Pete's drumming doesn't resemble anybody's drumming that I've ever heard before. He's his own, and on this record, he brings power without hitting hard. He brings groove without necessarily locking it in. None of his beats resemble beats that I was familiar with before or am familiar with since then, and yet they all work beautifully at putting the songs across. Adult issues in general are not things that get enough lyrical attention, in my opinion. And my friendships, my non-sexual friendships, not necessarily, with men or women, are huge. They're just huge and complex. And part of making up a song, there's a part of the brain that understands implicitly that making up a song, it may be a song that one will find oneself encountering, if not performing, for years to come, countless times. And so filling the songs with as much as possible, unsolved problems or relationships that are just exploding with potential energy and contradiction, which is each of our friendships, I think, are that way. And obviously there's so many more love songs than friendship songs, and I don't necessarily understand that because, right now I'm married to the person I intend to be married to the rest of my life. And so exploring courtship is not really that interested in exploring courtship right now, but I am interested in exploring ideas of relationships that are, beyond the initial stages of the relationship, that are deep, deep, deep into the relationship. And they're great to sing about.
Well, I hope that someday, buddy, we have peace in our lives, together or apart, alone or with our wives, that we can stop our whoring and pull the smiles inside and light it up forever and never go to sleep. My best unbeaten brother, this isn't all I see.
I had met Nat Sweeney, I think briefly, sometime around this time, 96 or 97, maybe 98. But then when I finished making I See a Darkness, and we had this, effectively a brand new record label, and I needed to figure out what to do with it. And so I went to New York City for an extended stay, figuring that putting myself bodily in such a place would be helpful if we were starting from scratch and letting the world know that this record exists. So I went to New York City instead of being in Shelbyville, Kentucky, where nobody would, encounter this stuff. And I started working with a publicist at a publicity firm called Nasty Little Man. And at the time, Sweeney was sort of an honorary staff member there because he's got an astounding way of he's a publicist. He's kind of a publicist. He loves the things he loves, and he loves to turn other people on to the things that he loves. It's his passion. And we had a mutual friend who was in distress, and so I ran into him one day on the way to Nasty Little Man. We started talking. We talked, became close friends, and started hanging out all the time. And at one point, a year or two later, probably 2 years later, he called and said that he had just run into somebody, Neil Strauss, I think, the kind of bizarre music into sex writing person out there, who I'll be eternally grateful to forever. But he said that he'd run into Neil Strauss, I think, who'd said that he'd just played a bunch of Bonnie Prince Billy records or he played I See a Darkness, maybe some other things for Rick Rubin, something like that. And then Sweeney, he saw Rick Rubin on the street, introduced himself, and mentioned that we were friends. And Rick Rubin said, "Oh, well, Johnny Cash we've just cut a demo of I See a Darkness." And Sweeney called me to tell me that. And that was, right there, even if it wasn't true, that was, felt like an achievement. It was one of the most exciting things I'd ever heard in my entire life. And that's it. This demo, I know, never count one's chickens before they hatch. And so I just thought, well, that's really neat. That's thank you so much for sharing that. And then we did a show at the Bowery Ballroom in New York, me and Sweeney, probably Mike Fellows, maybe James Lowe playing drums. And Rick Rubin came to the show and said, yeah, we have cut that song. And, what would you think about maybe coming to a session and overdubbing some piano on it? I said, of course, I'd love to do that. Absolutely. He said, okay, great. Here's my phone number. And I, didn't know what to do exactly. So I called him the next day. He didn't answer. I left a message and I said, Mr. Rubin, this is Will Oldham. I have to tell you, I can't play piano, and I didn't play it on the record. Colin Gagan did, and I don't necessarily expect anything to come of this whatsoever. However, if there were any way out of this brief, window, you thought there might be an appropriate time for me to potentially meet Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash, that would mean the world to me, because they were big in my world, in my brain, like both of them together, especially because I love the energy of people together, and I love Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash's energy together. It was like Neil Haggerty and Jennifer Harriman or something like that. So he called back and said, okay, well, we're doing a session in a few weeks at my house in Los Angeles, if you'd like to come to that, So I booked a flight out there using Southwest points to Los Angeles. It was a Sunday. I arrived in the morning. I rented a car, and I had no plan except just to call Rick Rubin and go over to his studio. And I landed, and I'm, pulling over every 2 or 3 miles from the airport into the city, going to a phone booth and calling the number, and nobody's answering. And I'm thinking, boy, there's egg on my face. What a Rube move to fly out to California because some guy said I can come to this recording session. But then at around 2 p.m, a woman answered, and I said, my name's Will. Rick invited me out to this session. She said, oh, he's just waking up now. Yeah, you can come on over. Gave me the address off the Sunset Strip, went there. Rubin was coming down. I could hear Johnny Cash's voice on a loudspeaker from the studio in the depths of the house. And so Cash comes out, Rubin comes out, Rubin introduces me. I said something like, "Hello, Mr. Cash." He said, "Please don't call me Mr. Cash. You can call me John, JR, or Johnny, but don't call me Mr. Cash." And Rubin said, "This is Will Oldham. He wrote that song, I See a Darkness." And Cash said, "Well, then why don't we work on that song right now?" Which I was not, of course, was not expecting. And we went in and immediately started working on it. And they played it for me then. And I didn't hear anything wrong with it. I could, to me, it sounded like the coolest thing I could ever have imagined in my wildest dreams. It was him and then somebody playing acoustic guitar. I said, "Who's playing guitar?" They said, "Might be Randy Scruggs." I'm not sure. So I'm not even sure that they knew at the time who was playing guitar, but Cash was singing on it. Sounded fantastic. But Cash said he wasn't happy with his delivery. Would I help out? And ultimately, I tracked a whole guide vocal, and they put our voices together and found that the voices sounded good together. And then Cash tried to sing along to my guide vocal. That didn't work, which is good because that's a stupid idea. So then the next idea was for me to go and sit in the vocal booth with him, just sitting knee to knee, with our faces about 2.5 feet from each other, with him on the mic, turning to me each time it was time to begin a line, to wait for my signal for him to begin the line, which is, one of the most exciting challenges I've ever been given, because it took so much presence of mind to just not disintegrate into nothingness at the surreality of the experience. But I'm a musical entity in many ways. It's what I'm a human being as well, who has other interests, I guess, but I look at the world through music and how it's created and what it does and what it's intended to do. And that's something that, in part at least, I believe that I share with Johnny Cash. And so in that moment, it was just this thing where I thought, this is one of those weird times where everybody may have some degree of an imposter syndrome. At that moment, I did not have an imposter syndrome. I felt like, oh, this is one of the few things that I actually feel like I can do, is to guide this music person through the performance of this song. And so let's just do this. But that's all happening in fragments of seconds because we're doing it. And then it worked. We did one take with me sitting there with him, and it's awesome. And then I think June Carter Cash came in and sat on the couch with me and talked to me about the first time they heard the song. She said it was on a cassette that Rick had sent them in Jamaica where they had a house. And she said that after they heard the song, she claims that she turned to her husband and said, "John, you have got to record that song."
Oh no, I see a darkness. 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 Did you know how much I love you? Is a hope that somehow you can save me from this darkness.
Well, the playfulness has to do with not wanting the song to potentially sink under its own weight. And putting you in there is just plain stupid. And it's intended to just say, look, I may feel a little overburdened right now, but I understand that it's a thin line between this overburdened sensation and completely snapping out of it and looking up and hearing birds sing. And you is just a way of reminding everybody that it's just a song, in case anybody were to think, oh my goodness, this is so bleak and so terrible to listen to. The is just that little valve, release valve.